Hello, welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about something that is very near and dear to my heart, and that subject is removal. And specifically what it is in Limited these days. We're going to be looking at this through the context of Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate, the Alchemy Limited format available on Arena right now. I'm going to talk a little bit about, of course, using data, because that's what we do here, about what it means to be good removal, what it means to be bad removal, and how people view removal, how the community views removal, versus how I view removal, and how 17 Lands views removal. So, what I'm going to be doing today is talking about cards with 3 stats from 17 Lands, essentially. Average last seen at, which is a stat that determines the average position in a draft that a card is last seen. So if it often gets picked 4th, then the average last seen at would be like 4-ish, you know what I mean? And there, of course, is the stat that goes along with that, which is average taken at. Now, this is the average spot that a card is taken by a 17 Lands user. This is almost always a higher number than average last seen at, because if you see a card, you inherently have to take it. So it like if you see a card and take it, you've seen it. So it's sort of like it is the stat for where basically the difference in those stats is how much of a gulf there is between 17 Lands users, which tend to be users that win above average, and the general Magic community. So the tighter the gap is, the better a card the 17 Lands users believe it is relative to the community. And then the last stat, of course, is game in hand win rate. It's the best overall stat for determining how good a card is in Limited. Some other people like, combining it with opening hand win rate, and sure, whatever, you can do that. I just like to look at one stat in this case. And for removal, I think that game in hand win rate is fine. But let's get into it. So let's rank some removal. And we're going to start with sort of some ideas about what removal is, right? So at the end of the day, removal is just a card. This is something that I think people don't understand, right? And obviously the card I'm displaying here is not removal, so don't be mad at me because it's not removal. But it's sort of like, hey, this is where removal gets you, right? Like you can remove all your opponent's creatures, and then they can have an Ascend from Avernus, and it's like, oh, and now the game's over. And obviously that's not like a good example. That's indicative of gameplay of every game. It's a rare and whatever. But the idea is that cards these days don't just kind of be a 5-mana 5/5. They don't just do that. Cards used to just be like, this is a 5-mana 5/5, and it's like, yes, that's all it does. Now you got Dread Linorm, which is a combat, or not even a combat trick, just a trick in general to save your creatures, or it could be a combat trick if you want it to be, and which gives +2/+2, and then it's also a huge dragon that basically can't be blocked in this sort of set. So you just have a lot of cards like that, and it's a common, right? How are you beating that card with removal? You're just not beating it. It beats removal in 2 ways, right? It gives you the hexproof, and then it also attacks after. And obviously you can remove the big dragon, but if it already got value from the trick, you're kind of down half of a card, or even more than that. And people often don't look at it that way. And I think people always see removal as a higher class of card than your typical card, than like your creature or your enchantment or whatever. But the reality is that there is no second class of card. Removal, I think, deserves to be evaluated with its peers here, which is just regular limited cards. And so I think there's this misconception that's, oh, you have to have removal in your decks, and I think that's just not true. I think you have to have the best cards in your deck, and the best cards in your deck can contain removal, and often do, and removal is often good. Removal is often very good cards. But removal also, because it's so easy to recognize how good of a card it is, I think a lot of times people overrate it, and we'll see that in just a moment here when we get into reviewing some of the cards. But these are just the caveats that I want to start this discussion with. is that removal, in my opinion, is not sacred. There's nothing holy about the card that says destroy a creature as a card as opposed to the creature itself, you know? And without further ado, let's start looking at some cards. So I'm going to be doing these cards in order of average last CNAT. We talked a little bit earlier about what that means, but basically the lowest average last CNAT means it's the highest value card by the community, and so we're going to start there. We're going to look at each of the removal spells, and this is like not really all of them, kind of, because like counter spells aren't included, which is sort of removal in blue, but I just wanted to look at like anything that can be considered removal, you know? And it does sort of have its broad strokes, but I think I've included a general sense here, hopefully, of everything. And the first card is Earthfelt Fury, and it's 1 red. Now, this card is a rare, so people are going to pick it highly. It reads very well. I thought this card was going to be very good. It's not. It just isn't good. Basically, it's a 3 mana deal 4, which is not a good card. The extra text on the card matters very low percentage of the time, it seems. It's only winning at 55%, which is actually lower than the average 17 lands user this format. The average 17 lands user is winning at 56% right now, and this is only winning at 5.1. And so clearly the card is overrated, right? The community is overrating this card. It's really nothing more than a simple removal spell that doesn't really have any other text on it. It costs double red. I think that it's basically just the same thing as the card we're going to talk about a little bit later, which is the improvised weaponry that came over from AFR. I think it has basically the same win rate as that card, but it's taken significantly higher. And even the 17 lands users are not any better than the community on this. They see the rare and they see the text on the card and they're like, oh, this card must be good, and it simply just isn't good. So I think we as a community need to sort of look at this card and say, you know, this just isn't a good card in a format. The game is not Hearthstone, and making the game into Hearthstone is not favorable, apparently. So that's a good thing to know. Next, by average last CNAT, is Cast Down. Now this card is substantially better in win rate, as you can see here. But it's taken about half of a pick lower. Again, obviously it's an uncommon, but yeah. And the 17 lands community is pretty high on this card. The difference between average last CNAT and average taken ad is only about 0.2 or even 0.17 or something like that. And it's winning 60.7% of the time, which is really good. That's a really good card. That's a tier 1 card according to my rating system, which is a really, really good card, and this card's really good. So I think the community is rating it properly. It's a very, very good card. It's very efficient. If I had to lean a direction here, I would say it's a little overrated, but I do think that it's properly rated. That the legendary text matters. It does come up. Sometimes you want to kill a dragon for 2 mana and you can't, but you know, I think in most games you're going to be happy that you get a 2 mana instant speed removal, which really is hard to come by. And yeah, there's really not much to say. This card's just good. It's just so efficient. 2 mana removal is really the key. And we saw that even with the last card, is that removal being, like, the cost of the removal matters so much as to how good it is. It really, like, you have to be able to do other stuff with your turn when you're playing removal generally. You have to be able to hold it up if it's an instant, like Cast Down. And yeah, so that's why this card is very good. Like this next card, which is Mephrod's Enthusiasm. Its average last CNAT is slightly lower, and its average taken out is a little bit lower as well. I guess it's like red is a worse color than black, which is true, so you could say these cards are basically even. This card is clearly a better card. It's only winning at 0.3% more, but again, red is a worse color than black. They're basically the same. They're both really good. People know they're really good. I don't really have anything else to say on this card. What it loses from Cast Down, in the sense that it's a sorcery speed removal, it gains back in the sense that it does give you value on your next creature when you cast it. And the value is not insignificant, too. Like, it sort of pays you back for removing small stuff, which Cast Down really does not do. Like, if you use this on a Myconid, and you use Cast on a Myconid, you're much happier doing this. So this is a much better early game play, and Cast Down is a much better late game card. which I think is actually good. It fits better, red better than Cast Down would, but as we'll see in a little bit, actually. So next is CTown Imprisonment. The 17 Lands community is extremely knowledgeable about this card. The 17 Lands community knows that this card is good. The difference between the average last seen at and the average taken at is only 19. That means that basically 17 Lands users are taking this every single time they see it, which is really like, and they're right, because the win rate is the best of any removal spell we're going to see on this board, and that means I think the card's underrated. I genuinely think this card is still underrated by the community because it's not the highest taken removal spell, and it should be. And I think the reasons that this card is good are understandable, right? So this card is basically a creature that has a removal attached to it. Now, I didn't include cards that are actually creatures that have removal elements, like Meteor Golem I didn't include, and I didn't include, like, Rasad. It just kind of becomes a little complex as to what you include with the removals. Like, I just wanted to say, this is a removal spell. This is really like a 4-mana 2/1 double team that also locks down your opponent's creature. But it's kind of hard to differentiate there. But yes, this card is giving you value when you play it, and that's why it's good. It's not good to be. It's good because removing your opponent's creature is good. It's a good effect to have. But, like I mentioned earlier, you're never going to win a game by just removing. You can't run a deck with all removal and win. You just can't. You're just not going to win that game. Because there's just, creatures are too efficient these days. So this, making a creature to combat the efficient creatures, really does come back to help you out. On to the next card is Dragon's Fire. And its win rate is only 58%, really. And this is surprising. I think a lot of people believe that this card is really, really good, and the reality is that it simply just doesn't get there. People love looking at this and say, oh, but there's so many dragons in this set, I can reveal a dragon and deal more damage. Great, cool. But how often are you doing that? And how often does it matter is the real question. Right, so what percentage of the time are you using a dragon with power that's greater than like 4 or even 3? And the answer is like a decent percent, but like in red you want to be aggressive. You kind of just want to use this as a 2-mana deal 3, and a 2-mana deal 3 is fine, but it by no means has a win rate that's indicative of its average last seen at being 2.79. That's so high. So this is a card that I'm unlikely to be able to put in my deck anymore, just because it's too aggressively taken by people that don't really understand, I think, that it isn't providing any value. It's a 2-mana removal spell that doesn't provide any value. And in a set where, and as all limited sets sort of are these days, where creatures provide you value most of the time, this card is not super premium. This card is basically your average card. This is a replacement level card in a good deck. Maybe it's a little above replacement, maybe it's not. It becomes better if you don't have removal at all, obviously, and it becomes better with dragons. But it's a very situational card, and I think that broadly it's overdrafted. And so that's the sort of the first revelation we've had here in terms of cards that, or actually the first red enchantment removal spell that's overdrafted is also an interesting thing to think about. I think this is really the first card where it's like, this just isn't as good as people see it as. And that's all I have on Dragon's Fire. So the next card is Favorite Enemy. Again, the rare bias here. People take it because it's a rare, and I don't whatever. But they don't take it as much as the other rare, so they recognize that it's worse, which it clearly is. It wins at basically unplayable tier. Obviously, it's overrated. I mean, even 17 Lands users overrate it. 17 Lands users take it almost every time they see it, which is absurd. It's only, it's 25 points from its average last seen to average taken at, which is really not anything. So our 17 Land users are not woke to this card yet, as we say. So, we can only hope that someday people will come around to this card not being good. Why is it not good? It does kind of have all the things that I said that you need to have in a removal spell to be good, which is that it gives you value over the course of a game, and it's cheap. But the problem is that you need to have something on the battlefield, and it's fighting. So you're probably just like 2-for-1ing yourself a lot of the time, and maybe even when you 1-for-1, it's like not that good. So you're kind of already just like down. Like you have to line things up, and you can't remove what you want, and it's very annoying. So I just don't think it gets there in terms of like the value provided is also very marginal because there aren't that many creature types, and they have to die. It's not even when they enter the battlefield or something. So it just really doesn't do enough to be worth playing, essentially. Next, it's everybody's favorite card. It's Grim Bounty, and it's this one I actually struggled with a lot because it is taken very highly, and it does win a lot. But I still think this card is overrated. I do. And the real reason I think it's overrated is that it's taken over some of the other removal spells that we're going to see a little bit later that are much better than it. It's obviously a good card. And people take it highly because it's flexible and good and whatever, but it's black, so it is restrictive. You can't splash it, really. And it wins about 1% less than Cast Down. Now, Cast Down is of course properly rated, and this is overrated. It's also an expensive card. But, I mean, this is between overrated and properly rated. I'm not going to say that it's, like, vastly overrated. This is the most overrated. Obviously, the rares are way more overrated than this card, but I lean more towards that direction here. And that's just, again, a personal bias with removal in general, is that I'm sort of skeptical about how good it can be. But this one is solid. If you're going to be taking removal, Grim Bounty is fine. Probably, like, overrated / properly rated. Like, you just, again, the average last seen at and the average taken at are indicative of a card that is, like, above that 60% win rate barrier. Like, it has to be that, like, tier 1 of card. This is just a tier 2 card. This is just a card that isn't winning you games by itself, really, ever. No removal spell's ever going to do that. Except for maybe, like, CTown Imprisonment. But, yeah, it just doesn't quite get there for me. It is close. I'm not, like, going to be like, oh, people don't understand, this card's not that good. It's very good, so I'm not going to be, like, that hateful about it, but I do think it sort of underscores the point that I have, where it just isn't quite, it's not quite what people think it is. Next, Sewer Plague, and this is one of the most overrated cards so far. Now, 17 lands users are a little bit more aware that this card is not actually very good. If we look back, it's taken lower than Grim Bounty, which it should be. Although I think there are some content creators who are saying that it's better. Don't listen to those people. Those people don't know what they're talking about. This card is not better. It is clearly not better. And it's winning at like it's good. It's a good card. It's not a bad card. But to be taken at this 3.65 rate, I guess sort of like some of it is that there really aren't commons in this set that are good. And so this is a good common, but it really, like, I've been hearing hype after hype about this card, and I'm not sold on it. I think that it is still overrated by people. I almost never get these. I would take a Grim Bounty over this every single time, and I think most people seem to believe that that's true as well. But I think there are some that are warmer on this card, and I don't see it. Basically, this card is hard removal, but it takes a long time to be that, which in a fast format like this one does matter, and it doesn't deal with big creatures right away. Now it's 3 mana, so it eventually dealing with a big creature is great, but you're going to take like 2 or 3 damage if you're dealing with a big creature when it hits you and you don't want to block it because it's going to trigger one of your creatures. Yeah, so this card I think is fine, perfectly playable, perfectly a removal spell, perfectly good, but it is an overrated card. Guiding Bolt. Now this card, interestingly enough, is winning a lot more than Sewer Plague. And I would not have told you that that would be true at the start of the format. And part of that is true because white is such a good color. I'll acknowledge that. White is a very good color in this format. It's the best one in this case here. Black, of course, being second, and then it's sort of like green and red. I would say green is better than red. I think firmly green is better than red in my view here. But to the point with this card, why is it good? And people, I think, are actually properly rating this card, which is rare. It's very rare that a card like this is properly rated because it's removal. And people see, oh, destroy a big thing and that's it. The 3-mana deal with a creature power 4 or less or toughness 4 or greater, all that stuff. People see that card and they're like, wow, it removes big stuff. But most of the time, Limited doesn't have big stuff. So you just never do anything. But this card has additional text on it, and it has additional text on it that says Scry 2, which, when you want to cast this card, tends to be very relevant. So that's what pushes it over the hump here, and it's rated properly, actually, this time. I think people actually are viewing this well. I think 17 Lands users are actually underrating it a little bit, but I think the community at large is properly rating this card as a really, really good card. I think it's even like, it's basically as good of a pick as Grim Bounty. That's what this card is in win rate. And so that's, now I wouldn't take it over a Grim Bounty because, I think this does sort of have a little bit of that. Well, it's in white, so it gets a little bit of a bump. But there's something to be said for being in starting in white, and this card would allow you to do that. So I think this card is actually is very solid. Next, Grave Choice, with basically the same average last seen at, but it's actually taken higher than Guiding Bolt, which I think is probably a mistake. And the reason that it's taken higher is that it seems like it gets more creatures, like it hits more creatures, but the reality is it probably hits about the same amount of creatures in terms of like you having a choice versus your opponents having a choice. Now you do get a little bit of buyback here, like you get the card if your opponent sacrifices something mana value 2 or less, which does happen like a decent percentage of the time. But again, this card is like, and this is part of the reason I say Sewer Plague is overrated, right? So Sewer Plague is basically the same card as this, but it's seen at earlier than this card, which is not like it's not seen as late as Grave Choice, which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Just because this card is a better card than Sewer Plague. So, yeah. That's why I say this card's probably rated, and I say Sewer Plague is overrated, because this, just relatively speaking, these kind of do similar things. They're 3-mana removal. They don't give you exactly what you want, but you get there sort of eventually. And yeah, they're just nice. Sometimes they line up really, really well. That's kind of like their high upside removal. Next. Oh boy. It's Minimus Containment. What else is there to say? Please, I guess keep taking this card so that, I get to have free, good cards in my packs. This card is unplayably bad. It's not, clearly the game handling rate dictates that it's just a tier 3 card, and if you really needed it and you were playing a control-y deck, sure. I don't play those style of decks generally, so not a big priority for me. This card is bad in so many ways, and it's overrated in even more ways than it's bad. So you play this card on turn 3, it's awful, because your opponent is now ramped to 5, which is really bad. And in this format, your opponent's just ramped to play 2 double team creatures, or something like that. You know what I mean? There's so much to do with mana all the time in every Magic format that this card just isn't good. It just isn't a good card. And there's incidental artifact and enchantment removal throughout the set a little bit. Not much, but there's some of it. And it just kind of it's terrible. You never want to cast this when you want to cast removal. You want to cast removal early when when your opponent doesn't have many creatures, so you can get control of the board and start pushing damage, so that you have the upper hand in the late game when you're trying to close out the game, right? In most cases. Now, some decks are obviously more controlling and whatever, but if the controlling decks don't want to play this on turn 3, they'll just get run over. So this card, basically, it costs 6 mana. That's what you should think that this card costs, and it just isn't a good 6 mana card. I don't know. The win rate sort of tells all here. I don't have anything else to say. In a color that is clearly the best, this is a card that is winning at below average rates, which basically tells you that the card is truly below replacement. It is not necessary, and people seem to take it like it is. Next, and this is really the problem that we see in our society, right? Like, look at this. Can we discuss for a little bit of a moment here that the Arena community has, and you can see that 17 lands users are better. You can see that they're better. That are basically taking the card Patcher's Humiliation, Patchryer's Humiliation. I just like calling it Patchers, so that's what I'm going to call it. I know that it's wrong, but I like saying it. The community's underrating this card. This card is absurd. It's the second best removal spell of the removal spells. It's right behind CTown Imprisonment. It's busted. But Spencer, you talked earlier about how that fight spell needed creatures and this needs creatures. But this doesn't do nothing without creatures. And it's important that it doesn't do nothing, because sometimes you just have to use it to remove something's ability. It's very bad. It's something you don't want to do. You're probably still not winning that game. But sometimes you have to do it, and this card does let you do that. This card also absolutely obliterates one of the best commons in the set, which is Hippogriff. It just destroys it. Hippogriff can't beat this card. Hippogriff cries. Any invincibility effect just is obliterated by this. It basically just removes everything. Like, you tend to have a lot of creatures on the battlefield. I personally underestimated this card, because I'm like, how many creatures do you have on the battlefield? How many of your opponent's creatures are you going to be able to really remove? Is this a win more effect? What if you're losing? But you're not losing all the time. And so I think people like me and some other people forget that. You are sometimes in a even or winning position, and this does help you sort of build on that. But yeah, just take this card more. This card's absurdly good. Next, Band Together. I'm going to say it. It's overrated. It's overrated, baby. Yes, it is. Why? Why is it overrated? Well, it's the only green removal spell, really, other than that one we saw earlier that's terrible. So this is kind of it in green. So people are like, I need to have removal and I'm green. I need to have this card in my deck. Oh my god, I need it right now. But the reality is you don't need to have it. You can just have cards. Now the card is winning. It's winning at 57.4%. That's really good. And its average LC night is 4.5, which is probably about where a 57.4% card should be viewed. It's like around some of the stuff, but then you look at some of the cards around it, and you're like, but these other cards are just like, and you look at like this card, and it's just better than this card, and it's taken it like similar places, and you look at Portable Hole, which is like much worse. It's still overrated. It's still overrated. And this is coming from a standpoint that all removal is kind of a little bit overrated. So again, this is just sort of comes with the territory with me. You gotta understand. But yeah, you don't need to, like, a 3-mana fight spell. It's good. This card itself is good because it's resistant to removal. But I had a deck today that trophied, and I, of course, am not not a mythic gamer. I'm not the best player on the planet, so I'm not playing against everybody's like grandmaster here. But it goes 7-1. It has one removal spell. It's this. It has one of these, and it has a bunch of big drag. I played basically mono creatures, and just this. And you don't need more than that, really, most of the time. So, I don't know. I think this card is still overrated. Next, Portable Hull, definitely overrated. Just worse than the last card, taken at about the same place. People think that this, like, conditional removal is bad. Yes, this removal is cheap. Is it decent in aggressive decks if you need removal? Yeah, probably. If you're playing this in, like, Boros, are you going to be really sad? Probably not. This is probably fine in Boros, and Boros is good. But, I don't know. It just doesn't do it for me. Like, you know? Like, removal that just becomes worse. Like, after turn 4, this is just bad forever. Like, it's just never good again. So, it's actually, the only redeeming quality to Portable Hold this set is there are a lot of good specialized creatures on turn 2, and this does deal with those. So that's really all it's doing. But it's still bad. Next, and this is a card, and this card, I think people are now, understanding that this card really isn't what it was last time. Improvised Weaponry, it's 3-mana, deal 2, it's a sorcery speed, so it's not an instant, so you're not going to get any blowout potential. You do get your mana back with a treasure token, and that does matter, but it's basically the same as Portable Hole in terms of its stats. Its average last is 4.7, and its average taken at 6.74. You probably should be taking almost anything else you can over it. Its win rate is kind of awful, like 2 percentage points below average for 17 lands users is pretty awful indictment on this card. Because it just doesn't do enough on turn 3 anymore. Like, this card just is, like, so much worse than Myconid. Like, this thing just gets Myconid just obliterates this card. So, and there's, double team on turn 2, like, it's already gotten value before you even, like, killed the thing, so it just isn't good. Next, Ray of Frost. You're going to see both of the blue removal spells in this. There are 2 enchantment blue removal spells. This one is truly awful. Don't put it in, like, this is a public service announcement. Do not put this in your deck. There's no deck that I would put this in. There's literally no deck I would put this card in. It's terrible. Don't play it. It's taken at 5.14. That's absurd. It's taken over to hear something I watch. Why? I don't know. It costs the same amount. It's just, like, Here's Something I Watch has another effect on the card, and this card is just, it's like, if these specific conditions line up, it's like a hard removal spell, 1 in every 55 games, and it's fine, and whatever. It's bad. Please. Conditional enchantment removal is bad. It's bad. It is not good. Enchantment removal that is unconditional and provides you value when it enters the battlefield tends to be good. This is the opposite of that. It is very bad. It is cheap, and that's great. It's also, now, this does suffer from being in blue. I'm not going to deny that. And its win rate in AFR suffered from it being in blue, because blue was equally bad in both sets for some reason. I don't know why they decided, they were like, blue's bad in AFR. Let's just reprint all the cards, and it'll be good this time. Nope, didn't happen. So, I don't know. Choices were made on that. Choices were made, but yes. So next, I want to hear something I watch. Card, pretty good. This card is very solid, and you've been able to pick this up late. 17 land users, I think, are actually underrating this. In this case, I think 17 land users are doing the underrating of this card because it is flexible. Sometimes it can save your creature in combat, and sometimes it just deals 5 to an attacker. Generally, you don't really want to be doing that with hippogriffs all over the place, but either way, the card's good. Now, what is good about the card? Obviously, there is 2 modes, right? And that matters. That's a thing that is very good to have for your cards. It makes your cards a lot better. And so having removal that can also act as like, I'm killing you out of nowhere, it's a good thing to have. And so that's why this card's very good. I think that this card, over time, people will start to understand that it is good and it is playable and you should be playing it. And they'll take it higher, but I do think that people are underrating it for now. Also, 5 is a lot of damage. It deals with pretty much any creature in the set, especially any flyer. This deals with flyers, any single flyer that's attacking you. Again, unless your opponent's playing a hippogriff, and then you cry, but that's okay. Next. Charm Sleep. This card is unplayably bad. It should never be put into any deck in Limited. There is no deck that I would put this card in. Literally none. There is no way you convince me to put this card in a draft deck. You couldn't convince me to do it. It's terrible. It's unplayably bad. the community seems to think that it's good for some reason. There's like a flicker theme in the set, and they're like, nah, this card's good. What? Like, the flicker theme is terrible, and this card's bad, and this card is always bad. And like, there's sack, and there's so many ways to absolutely destroy this, and it's double blue. There's nothing good about this card. There's nothing to like about this card. Rasad does everything that this card does, but like 8 times better. This is just like a worse Sea Tower Imprisonment. This is why blue is bad. Anyways, next, Verde's Fireball, and this card, I think, is actually properly rated. Actually, maybe it's still a little bit overrated, to be honest with you. I think I actually might go change this, but I don't know. It's actually like pretty good. Like, I found this to be playable, especially the average taken at for 17 lands users. 8 seems about right for where I'm taking this card if I'm going to play it in my deck. You're not happy about it, but you're probably fine with it at 8. Or at 5, it's kind of tough, but I think this card, people understand what it is, and it does deal the damage, but it is very expensive, obviously, and it doesn't deal with any sort of abilities or anything, so they just kind of knock it down a bit, but people sort of know that it's bad, and so the community understands that it's not very good. And last but not least, in terms of removals by Pit Trap, somehow has a better win rate than Charm Sleep, which actually I guess isn't that surprising, because Charm Sleep is unplayably bad. This is also unplayably bad, and you're going to say, but they have such different numbers. How could you say that this card is also overrated? Because you shouldn't put it in your deck. There is no deck that I would put this card in. And yet, it is as of this day that people are putting it into their deck. And, look, I guess an average taken out of 17 lands users of 10.6 is basically like, yeah, you literally never take this card. But the average last seen at is atrocious, and the community needs to be even lower than it is on this card. It's truly terrible. All right, and that wraps up the discussion I'm going to have today. So for this set, white removal tends to be underrated unless your name is Minimus Containment, and then you sit at the back of the class because we don't respect you. But in this set, the white removal is underrated, and so people can get it, and that's why sort of white is part of the reason white is so good in this set and so great is that cheap removal matters and card net cost matters. And when I say net cost, what do I mean? So Grim Bounty costs 4 mana, but it makes you a treasure. So its net cost is like 2. Right? Now you had to pay the 4 mana, but you got another mana, you got 1 mana's worth of value back for a later turn. So you banked that mana. And your opponent, maybe paid 3 mana for their 3-drop, and you killed their 3-drop with Grim Bounty, and so now you have, and you only paid 3 mana, but now you get to spend that extra mana on a different turn, which can matter more, and stuff like that. And another example of this, Sea Tower Imprisonment. Sea Tower Imprisonment's net cost is like 2, because you're getting a 2-drop from it. You're basically putting a 2-drop onto the battlefield, and you're doing this other thing. Now you had to pay more 4 mana to get the extra value, but the net cost matters. How much value you're getting for your card. Mephrit's Enthusiasm, you're paying 2 mana, it's cheap, and you're getting an additional value from your card after the removal resolves. And so that's relevant. So, and obviously the cost straight up. Patchwork's Humiliation, 1 mana. Basically removes any card your opponent can have. There isn't a ton of huge stuff in the format. I mean, there is some in green. Like, green has all the huge stuff, and if you're not playing against green, you're pretty happy with the Patchworkers. And the last thing is people pick based on rarity. You know, you sort of know this already, the rare drafting and whatever. And the rare drafting's fine. I'm not going to begrudge anybody for doing it. It's your life, you know. And if you want to draft removal, be my guest. I do not mind. Even after today's discussion, I don't mind. You know, I'm not an anti-removal individual in terms of like you can do whatever you want with your gems on Arena here. But people pick based on rarity, and they sort of trust. And I kind of do this too at the start of a format. I'm like, well, should I take this uncommon removal or should I take this common removal? Let's just take the uncommon. Let's trust Wizards of the Coast that they made a card that is uncommon slightly better than the one that's common. It's not always true. And that's going to conclude my discussion for today. Thanks for stopping by. My venting session about how people overrate removal. Yeah. So that's it. Thanks. See you.